Hello everyone, welcome back to our lecture series on discourse analysis. In this lecture, as you already can see on the screen, I'm going to talk about a different topic or a new topic, and that is discourse grammar. Discourse grammar is a relatively new phenomenon. So it's a new approach to language analysis, which has become popular during the last 20 to 25 years. So in this lecture, I'm going to provide you with an introduction to discourse grammar, mainly based on the book that we have been using in this class, and that is Discourse Brian Patridge, 2012. We will also look at other relevant sources as the discussion goes on. During the discussion, we will ask several questions. And some of these questions are, what is discourse grammar? And then how is discourse grammar different from other traditions or frameworks of grammar that we have seen or that have been used in linguistics, mainly structural linguistics or generative linguistics or functional linguistics? And then how do we conduct a grammatical analysis in this approach? So what are the tools that we need or we use in order to conduct an analysis in this approach to grammatical analysis? And then how or why is discourse grammar useful? So let's start off with the first question. What is discourse grammar? So here is some background to discourse grammar. As the proponents of discourse grammar claim, traditional explanations of grammar is mostly sentence-based. So what do we mean by a sentence-based grammar? As you would remember from your grammar classes or syntax class, in the traditional explanations or analysis of grammar, our largest syntactic unit is the sentence. Our discussion stops at the level of the sentence. So we would analyze the sentence to see how sentences are constructed. Different phrases or different phrase structure rules, different principles that we may use, how different syntactic categories are used, and that's what traditional grammar is mostly about. So as a result, since we limit our discussion on the sentence, this kind of grammar ignores the grammatical selection in longer real-world texts. So what do we mean by this? What is long real-world text? So that is natural language that we produce. That could be natural spoken discourse or written discourse. So how is actually grammar used in written discourse or spoken discourse? Or how are these structures that we analyze in our grammar classes actually used in real discourse, in natural language that people produce in day-to-day life, in natural language that people used to write in newspapers, magazines, articles, and so on. And this is an aspect that is generally ignored in the traditional explanation of grammar. And this is an argument put forward by the proponents of discourse grammar. And this is why they claim that discourse grammar is needed. So, discourse grammar is an approach to analyzing grammar as an aspect of discourse rather than as something that operates only within the boundaries of the clause or sentence. So discourse grammar actually starts from where the traditional grammar ends. Discourse grammar studies how grammatical elements are used in spoken and written discourse, rather than in isolated sentences. So mainly in discourse grammar or in this approach to grammatical analysis, we would ask questions such as how a structure is used, why a particular structure is used in a discourse, and where a particular structure is used. So if you take an element, or if you take a pronoun, if you take tense, if you take direct speech or indirect speech, if you take a particular grammatical element, how is it used in actual discourse? And why do we make certain choices in actual discourse or natural language? Why do we select one tense over another tense? And where is a particular grammatical element used or a structure used? And this is what we try to investigate in discourse grammar. After this basic introduction to discourse grammar, now we need to move on to find out how discourse grammar is actually conducted, how grammar is analyzed from a discourse perspective. So that is the next question we are going to look at. How do we conduct a grammatical analysis in this approach? Since we are interested in natural language in this approach to grammar, natural discourse grammar is, or discourse grammatical analysis is based on corpus data. So what do we mean by a corpus? Corpus is a collection of naturally occurring language. It can be written discourse or spoken discourse. The plural of corpus is corpora. So we have many corpora developed in linguistics or developed by different institutes around the world for the analysis of language. So corpus linguistics is a branch of modern linguistics in that we look at how a certain grammatical phenomenon is used in naturally occurring language, in written discourse or spoken discourse. We also would look at how it is different from descriptions that we have in textbooks or grammar books or in dictionaries. So discourse grammar is based on corpus data. Why? Because discourse grammar is interested in how language is actually used in naturally occurring language, in the written discourse as well as the spoken discourse. So people who approach grammatical analysis from a discourse perspective always rely on corpus linguistic data. So there are many different corpora that have been developed in the world for the analysis of language. One is the corpus of contemporary American English. This is probably the largest corpus developed for linguistic analysis. And then we have the British National Corpus, which is known as the BNC. And then Brown Corpus, which is one of the oldest corpora in the world. And then the Cambridge and Nottingham Corpus of Discourse in English. We are going to see a few examples from the work that has been conducted based on Cambridge and Nottingham Corpus of Discourse in English, which is known as the CANCODE, and then the International Corpus of English. Now let's look at a few examples to see how grammar is analyzed from a discourse perspective. The first example that I present you comes from work McCarthy published in 1994. His work was based on corpus data from newspapers and magazines. So let's start off with these three words. The words are that, this, and it. If I ask you to categorize these three words, or if I ask you to put these words into categories, how would you do that? Well, based on what you have learned in grammar classes, you would immediately categorize that and this as demonstratives, while it is categorized as a pronoun. But using corpus data, McCarthy has shown that these three words that we put in two different categories according to traditional grammar are used by speakers to perform different discourse functions. Speakers in natural discourse alternate among these words to perform different discourse functions. So let's look at this text to understand how this works. As you can see here, this is an advertisement that comes in a consumer magazine, or a description that comes in a consumer magazine. And if you read this, you can see this text consists of three sentences. If you buy a newly built home, you may have trouble getting a mortgage unless it has a warranty, such as the Build Mark warranty from the National House Building Council. This covers most defects for the first 2 years and major defects for the 10 years. It offers valuable insurance cover if the builder goes bust while the house is being built, or if major structural faults develop. Now, if you notice, the second sentence in this text starts with this, while the third sentence begins with it. Now, the question is, why is the writer using this to begin the second sentence? Let's first figure out what this refers to in this sentence. This in this sentence refers to the Build Mark warranty. And then it refers to, once again, the Build Mark warranty. So by using that in this context, the writer is introducing a new topic to the discourse. This signals a new topic in the discourse, which is the Build Mark warranty. And when the writer wants to continue with the same topic, in the next sentence, the writer uses it. So here, as McCarthy rightly points out, this introduces a new topic to the discourse, and it helps the writer continue with the same topic that has already been introduced in a previous sentence. So the writer is nicely alternating between this and it, and as we can clearly see, this and it perform different discourse functions. To summarize, this introduces a new topical focus into a discourse, and then it helps the writer maintain the same topic in the next sentence. We don't see the use of that in this example, but we can see how that is used in this text. This is once again coming from Hughes and McCarthy's article in 1998. And this is a holiday brochure. Let's read this text to find out what the writer is trying to achieve by using that in the second sentence. Slob out around the pool, sneak in a couple of ice-cold beers, and do it all again. And if that doesn't sound like a holiday that's hotter than a sauna, then lend us your sauna. So in this example, we can clearly see that the writer is using that in the second sentence. Why is the writer using that over this in this instance? The writer could have easily used this as well. But if the writer had used this in this context, that would have introduced a new topical focus into the discourse. And that is not what the writer wants. So in this case, that introduces a new point of view. And now we are referring to this from the reader's point of view. At the same time, it helps the writer refer back to the first sentence and comment on it. Slob out around the pool, sneak in a couple of ice-cold beers, and do it all again. Now the first sentence is introduced. And if that doesn't sound like a holiday, now that refers to the first sentence. And then the writer is making a comment on the first sentence while making it distant. And this is the discourse function of that, the demonstrative that in this context. So this, that, and it perform different functions in discourse in signaling focus and topicality. But this is not something that we have looked at in traditional grammar when we categorize these words into different word classes. So summarizing this example, we can say it often signals reference to a continuing or ongoing topic in a text rather than just something inside or outside the text. This often indicates the raising of a new topic or a new focus of the current topic, and then that has a distancing or marginalizing function in a text rather than just a demonstrative function. Now let's look at another example. This example concerns reported speech. When we learn reported speech in grammar classes, we have learned that whenever we report something, we use the reported verb in the past tense. We would say, X said that, X told Y that, or X asked Y. If for whether, and that is the third one is used when we report a question. However, based on Corpus data, Hughes and McCarthy are showing that some speakers, when they naturally use language, they use past continuous tense for reporting. Now let's look at this data coming from Hughes and McCarthy. In each sentence or utterance, what is colored in orange is the reporting part. One thing that you can notice in each sentence is that the reporting part is in the past continuous tense. This is not what we would typically do, at least based on the grammar that we have learned in textbooks. But why are the speakers doing this? Why do speakers choose past continuous over past simple? As Hughes and McCarthy observe, past simple seems to give more authority to the actual words uttered, while the past continuous seems more to report the event of the uttering. If the speaker wants to give more prominence to the actual words that he or she is reporting, the speaker would use the reporting verb in the past simple tense. But if the speaker wants to give more prominence to the event of reporting, then the speaker would use the past continuous tense. Based on this data, Hughes and McCarthy show that these two tenses are associated with two different discourse functions, and they are foregrounding and backgrounding. Now let's look at another example. And this example comes from Discourse Analysis and Introduction, the book that we have been using in this class. And this is a conversation taking place between an announcer and a caller on a radio program. In this conversation, you can see the announcer is asking two questions from the caller, and then the caller is answering them. Announcer asks, "What did you want to say to Alison tonight?" The caller says that I'm sorry for the fight we had the other night. The announcer asks, "What was that over?" The caller says, "Something rather silly, actually." Now, if you notice in this conversation, whenever the caller answers, he's not answering in complete sentences. He is leaving out some section of the sentence. If the caller had answered the first question in a complete sentence, he would have said, "I want to say that I'm very sorry for the fight we had the other night." But the caller is not doing that. Why? Now let's go to the second sentence. What was it over? And the caller is not saying that was over something rather silly, actually. Once again, the caller is leaving out a section of the sentence. This feature is a common feature found in spoken discourse, and this is called ellipsis. Ellipsis is the omission of an element, some section of an utterance, when it can be recovered from the context. Like other examples that we have talked about, ellipsis is also rule governed. There are discourse features associated with ellipsis. The last question that we answer is, how or why is discourse grammar useful? Let's answer this question with a quotation from Hughes and McCarthy's 1998 article. They say, "The traditional explanations often cannot capture adequately the selection procedures the learner will need to engage with in creating longer texts. Traditional sentence-based grammar approaches for teaching the demonstratives and the pronoun it usually concentrate on spatial and temporal meanings of the demonstratives and impersonal meanings of it, but typically keep them in separate pedagogical compartments, despite the evidence of data that they frequently operate as alternatives in real contexts." So in grammar that we have learned in classrooms and textbooks, discourse functions are often ignored. How grammar is actually used in discourse is not something that receives attention in those approaches to teaching grammar. So Hughes and McCarthy point out that we would certainly not wish to suggest that the traditional and discourse-based approaches are mutually exclusive. Discourse grammar cannot replace sentence-based grammar, and vice versa. So, discourse grammar is showing an aspect of language use that is often ignored in sentence-based grammar. So, discourse grammar helps us see this aspect and prepare learners for real communication or real use of language, both in speech and writing. So that is the use of discourse grammar. So finally, we can say discourse grammar is relatively young. It shows an interesting aspect of naturally occurring language.